Chapter 9. The Confederation and the Constitution. The American Revolution did not affect every person that was living in the colonies during that time period. Most would go on with their everyday lives. People would still go to work, children would still go to school, and business would not be affected. And to most colonists, the English were treating them well. However, after the Revolution, the Founding Fathers faced a new problem. They were able to form their own government by themselves with the national debt on their hands. Before they declared independence in 1776, they created the Articles of Confederation, which basically said that the government shall be too weak to enforce anything, commonly referred to as the Firm League of Friendship of the States. That backfired. This thing called Shays' Rebellion happened, where expatriates would storm a Massachusetts government building and would force the state to repeal their debts because they were being paid, but soon they were suppressed. States, however, would send the delegates to discuss the matter, and they were nicknamed the Council of Demagogues, with George Washington overseeing. Their job was to make sure nothing like this would ever happen again. They came up to the Grand Compromise, and later, the Constitution. But not all the states liked the Constitution. Chapter 10. Launching of the new ship state. In 1789, George Washington would become the first president underneath the Constitution. The first thing he would do was pass the Bill of Rights. Meanwhile, the new government would decide to take all the state's debt from the war, leaving them to face a major economic crisis. Luckily, we had a man named Alexander Hamilton who would see the debt as a national blessing and saw the resolution by levying a tax on alcohol. That was a mistake. In retaliation, Thomas Jefferson would form the first political party, the Anti-Federalists, who mainly fought against Hamilton's policies in the bank. To make matters worse, the Whiskey Rebellion would occur that would force Hamilton to remove the tax. In France, the French Revolution was taking place. That would lead to one of the most bloodiest revolutions in world history. Because of this, George Washington would pass the Neutrality Act towards the end of his presidency, which advised America to stay out of foreign affairs and to avoid. Chapter 11. The Triumphs and Travails of the Jeffersonian Republic. John Adams is never seen as a very likable president, and that would limit him to one term. He would be the last Federalist in office, and to ensure that the Federalist Party would have some sort of power in the government, he would appoint 6 new judges for the Supreme Court, literally the night before Thomas Jefferson became president. That would lead to the Marbury v. Madison case, and to save his own skin, Supreme Judge John Marshall would create judicial review. And almost immediately after Thomas Jefferson became president, the French decided to sell all their land claims west of the Mississippi to America. The Louisiana Purchase, as it came to be, would double us as a country at a very low price. Thomas Jefferson saw this as a great opportunity, but would question his choice if it was constitutional or not. But anyway, he would send out Lewis and Clark to try to find a route to the Pacific, which they did. However, his first vice president, Aaron Burr, conspired with a couple of people from New England to secede from the Union. That was unveiled by Alexander Hamilton, and eventually that would lead to Alexander Hamilton's death and his duel with Aaron Burr. Chapter 12. The Second War for Independence and the Outsurge of Nationalism. Ever since the Revolution had ended, the British had constantly disregarded their treaty with their former colonies by the impressment of American sailors and the refusal to take their troops out of the forts that remained in our country. A lot of Americans were angry at this, which would lead to the War of 1812. The war was pointless. Nobody knew exactly what we were fighting for, and the greatest battle of the war was fought after the peace treaty had been signed. The only significant outcomes of the war, was the burning of Washington, D.C. by the Canadians, the national anthem written by Francis Scott Key, and a new sense of American pride which would lead to the arrogant feelings later. And also, the first controversies that Chapter 13, The Rise of Mass Democracy. The first modern form of campaigning would take place in the presidential election of 1824, where mudslinging was first introduced. None of the candidates had enough electoral votes to win, but Andrew Jackson had the most. The corrupt bargain would take place that gave the presidency to John Quincy Adams. But nothing important would happen during his term. The next president was Andrew Jackson. His term was revolutionary. He would set the bar that the future presidents would be expected to surpass. He was a role model. He was the first president from the West, which meant he was very popular among the people, and he fought for the people. Politics would change forever, and so would the role of president. One of the things he vowed to destroy was the Bank of the United States, who he believed had too much power that they abused. He would not rest until he saw Nicholas Biddle and his bank dismantled, which he did. Another problem he faced was the nullifiers in South Carolina. Fortunately, nothing happened there. One of the most controversial acts during his presidency was the Indian Removal Act, where he removed all the Indian tribes east of the Mississippi to Oklahoma. That would leave the Trail of Tears, where thousands of Native Americans would die. Also, Texas would become a disputed area during his presidency, and he also led to Chapter 14, Forging the National Economy. Manifest Destiny and Western movement began to take hold of the country once more and more people began to realize that there was acres of untouched land just waiting there, with the chance of a new life away from the city, and a lot of Americans moved west in great numbers. There was also the first new wave of immigrants, the Irish and the Germans, who would give us things like potatoes and kindergarten. They had come to the country with different social and economic situations. The Irish were uneducated and poor, and most would be forced to stay in the cities. The Germans, however, were educated and had come prepared to start a new